All right. Well, the bells are signaling that we are at 11 a.m. So I will go ahead and begin with a brief introduction. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Amy Krappel. I am the director at the UF Center for European Studies. The Center for European Studies is a Department of Education Title VI National Resource Center, as well as a Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. So we focus on all things related to European and European Union studies. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's discussion will be recorded and available on the UFCES website. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation, and participants can submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. The Q&A button really does work better than the chat window, so we encourage you to please use the Q&A button. Thank you for joining us today to discuss CERN and a European model for international collaboration. This talk and the virtual series are supported by the Department of Education's Title VI National Resource Center grant, and this is part of the European Studies Because series, which explores non-traditional approaches to the study of Europe and European studies for non-traditional fields. For details on the other upcoming talks in this series, please visit ces.ufl.edu. Our speaker today is Dr. Richard Kavanagh, professor of physics at the University of Illinois, Chicago, who holds a joint appointment at the Fermi National Accelerator Lab as a senior scientist. His research interests include analyzing the immense volumes of experimental data collected by the Cern Large Hadron Collider located at the Franco-Swiss border near Geneva. He received his PhD in 1999 from Florida State University based on experiments performed at CERN, and following that, moved to Germany as a postdoctoral fellow at the Universität in Heidelberg. From 2001 to 2008, he was a member of the research faculty at the University of Florida. So this is a virtual homecoming for Professor Kavanagh. And he began his current work here on the Large Hadron Collider prior to joining UIC and Fermilab. He also spent time at l'École Polytechnique in Paris as a visiting scientist. So welcome back, Dr. Kavanagh, and I will hand it over to you. I would just remind everyone that at the end of the event, you will be automatically taken to an event survey, and we really appreciate it if participants can complete that survey so that we can learn better how to provide useful and informative discussions for you in the future. Rick?
All right, well, thank you very much, Amy, for this opportunity to really, as you say, have a homecoming. Both my wife, Petya, and I dearly love Gainesville, and we miss Gainesville very, very much. So it's a pity that I can't be with you today in person, but I'm super happy to be able to speak to you about a topic which is really near and dear to my heart. So let me go ahead and begin sharing my screen. And so today I'm going to speak to you about CERN, which is by now a household term, and how CERN, in many respects, but perhaps not all, represents a model for international collaboration. So CERN began really out of the aftermath of World War II, which took place from 1939 to 1945. In fact, many things came out of that, the aftermath, and including the European Union, as you all are very much aware. In 1942, during the war, the Americans, together with colleagues from the UK, secretly ushered in the atomic age by, for the first time, having an atomic pile which had a chain reaction. So the first nuclear reactor, which was constructed beneath the University of Chicago by Enrico Fermi. And so, in fact, it was really, it was scientists from America, from the UK, and Canada, which were really working on these things together. And then, rather more publicly, in 1945, the atomic age was ushered in through the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Interestingly enough, between 1942 and 1945, the Americans stopped collaborating with the UK and Canada. and went it alone. And that caused some reverberations, which actually continue even today. In 1945, I believe it was September 1945, World War II came to a conclusion, and the creation of the United Nations was done basically a month later. And it was really at this point that the Americans and the Soviets independently began to lead the atomic age. So in 1946, the US created the Atomic Energy Commission, and 3 years later, the Soviets detonated their first atomic bomb. It was around this time, just a year later, that the fifth UNESCO General Conference took place, and an American physicist by the name of Ussr Rabi, professor at Columbia University, who was also participating as a member of UNESCO in Florence, Rome, tabled a resolution which says that the UNESCO, or asked UNESCO to assist and encourage the formation and organization of regional research centers and laboratories. And the idea was that this was to increase and make more fruitful the international collaboration of scientists in the search for new knowledge in fields where the effort of any one country in the region was insufficient to the task. And to this end, the resolution is to undertake and to find out the needs and the possibilities for such regional research centers, and to make initial surveys and cost estimates about the location, and to help bring about the formulation of programs. And the key here is that without contributing to the cost of construction or the maintenance of UNESCO's regular budget. So the budget of these regional research centers were supposed to be outside of the UNESCO regular budget, which has had a profound impact on CERN, a positive impact, in fact. In February 1942, CERN was created. It was the European Council for Nuclear Research. And this is a letter from the council to Professor Rabi at Columbia University, where it says, we have just signed the agreement which constitutes the official birth of the project you fathered at Florence. Mother and child are doing well, and the doctors send you their greetings. In October 1952, so just a few months later, the UK, which was really felt out of the picture of the nuclear powers, separately detonated their own atomic bomb. And so joined the Americans and the Soviets as the three countries which had nuclear capabilities. And this is important because there was a feeling of urgency in Europe that they were being left out of the atomic age. Whereas the Americans and the Soviets were now on opposite sides of the fence, were developing their own nuclear programs, and there was a sense of urgency that atomic energy and atomic power were extremely important for the future, and that Europe was being left behind. In February of 1953, Geneva, Switzerland was chosen as the site for CERN. This was among proposals from the Dutch, from Denmark, from France and Switzerland. And Switzerland was chosen for a variety of reasons. One, that it was more centrally located than any of the other proposals. Two, Switzerland had been neutral during the war, and there were already a number of international institutions located in Geneva. And so the site for Geneva was chosen. A few months later, the CERN Convention was ratified, which set up the 12 original founding member states of CERN. And CERN ceased to become a council and became an organization, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. And in Article 2, it outlines really the founding principles of CERN as an organization, that it shall provide for collaboration among member states in nuclear research of a pure scientific and fundamental character, and in research essentially related related to pure scientific work. The organization shall have no concern with the work for military requirements, and all of the results of its experimental and theoretical work shall be published or otherwise made generally available. So these are really were the tenets which have made CERN so valuable historically. So in 29 September 1954, this is the picture of CERN in terms of the 12 original founding member states. So Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, UK, and Yugoslavia at that point. Now, a year later, the construction of the Proton Synchrotron began. And the reason why I include this slide is because this Proton Synchrotron, this facility, originally constructed in 1955, or started construction in 1955, is still in use today. It's one of the linchpins of the Large Hadron Collider. And so the history of CERN continues to play a very relevant, even technical role today. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome was established. The signing of the Treaty of Rome began the European Economic Community. And one of their very first acts, of course, it would not come into effect until a little bit later, but one of the very first acts 2 days later, roughly, was the creation of the European Customs Union and Euratom. Now, Euratom is often contrasted with CERN, but they're really two very different, very different entities. In the case of CERN, CERN was really focused on its primary mission of pure scientific research without really any connections to applicability or industry. Whereas Euratom was really established to help Europe come up to speed with atomic energy. And it's also very interesting to contrast the two institutions. CERN was really created by physicists for the pure science. Euratom really was developed in the context by politicians for issues which were really facing the European states at that time. And both of these institutions exist and are vibrant today, but of course doing different things with different focus. In June 1959, Austria signed as a member state. So the CERN member states were gradually growing. Interestingly enough, interestingly enough, in 1961, Yugoslavia, because of financial difficulties, was unable to pay the membership subscription to CERN, which is part of a treaty. And so they had to withdraw from CERN simply because they couldn't pay their membership dues. But that was offset by Spain joining in 1961. Now, as soon as Spain joined, Spain began to struggle itself with the membership dues. And in 1964, 65, and 66, it requested that those dues be reduced by 50%, 35%, and then 20%. And at some point, the Cern Council, which I will get to in terms of the governance of CERN, simply rejected the request. And so Spain formally withdrew in 1968. In 1981, CERN made many of the hallmark discoveries, and in the 70s, made many of the hallmark discoveries which established CERN as a laboratory of prominence on the international scene. And 2 years later, I think as partly as a result of that, Spain rejoined CERN as a member state. Portugal joined a couple of years later. And then in 1991, of course, the Iron Curtain fell, and Finland very quickly joined, and Poland, which had been an observer state since 1964, also officially joined CERN as a member state. Hungary joined a year later, In fact, Hungarian groups had been active at CERN for a long, long time, but they officially joined in 1992. And in 1992-93, Czechoslovakia joined. In 1992-93, they also split into different countries, Czech Republic and Slovak Republic, and separately they rejoined immediately. And then in 1999, Bulgaria joined CERN. Since then, in 2014, CERN accepted Israel as the first non-European state to become an official member of CERN. And then in 2016, Romania joined as a 22nd member, followed by a few years back, Serbia, which I think joined in 2019. So that's just to really point out that the history of CERN is hasn't necessarily always been smooth, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But countries have joined, countries have left, and it's really been the scientific and international collaboration attraction of CERN which has held together the institution over the years. Today, CERN is comprised of 23 different member states, which are in the dark blue. And I think it's really interesting that for the first time recently, Israel is there, and so it's not all European states. And there are several other states which are in the which are associate members and are in the pre-stage to membership. So Cyprus and Slovenia, and associate members which have a more long-term vision, but actually do intend to join. India, for example, is one particular note. And all of these states contribute significantly to the budget. There are observer states, so Japan, Russia, and USA are particularly to be noted. They remain observer states because you'll see this in a second, the subscription to CERN is between 3 to 5% of the GDP of the country. And so Japan and USA in particular don't want to pay that high subscription rate to join, and so they remain as observers. There has been even recently discussions about how these three countries could eventually join CERN as member states, but for now, I think the status quo will probably be realized where they remain as observers. But in total, there are over 70 countries from around the world which use CERN as a facility to conduct scientific research. And there are about 13,000 separate users, scientists who use it regularly on a daily basis, and about 2,500 CERN staff. So it's interesting to look at the budget contributions from the different member states. So these are just the contributions in 2019 from the founding members. Of course, there's the member states include more than just the founding members, but Germany by far is the leading contributor to the CERN budget, followed by the UK, France, and Italy. And then you have the others, which are considerably less, but they're all at the level of about between 3 to 5% of their per capita per person. So in terms of the CERN governance and the committees, CERN is governed by really two parts. There is the Cern Council, which is the final authority for governing CERN, and there is the CERN Directorate. The Cern Council acts as the legislative body, and the Directorate acts as the executive body. The Cern Council has two member state delegates. So there are 23 member states, so there'd be a total of 46 delegates comprising the Cern Council. And then there are two important advisory committees, the Finance Committee and the Scientific Policy Committee. On the Directorate side, there are roughly 10 different departments. There are 4 different associate directors, one of which is, one of the associate directors is specifically tasked with international relations. And the user community is primarily represented by the experiments down here, where the experiments are quasi-autonomous. They have their own governing structures. They are approved by Cern to be experiments at Cern, but they operate, their budget and their operations are separate from Cern. So I wanted to just briefly discuss some of the historical observations, and this is by a really interesting study, which was performed by Dominic Pestre. It's studies in Cern history, which you can find at the Cern Library. And it really discusses the early history of Cern. And one of his interesting points here is that the council delegates, of which there are 2 per member state, are entirely appointed by the domestic administrations. Now, there was a sense of urgency by the member states to catch up to the USSR in terms of nuclear matters. And so, and physicists at those times, and even to some extent today, had the ears of the politicians back at home. And so the delegates which were chosen to sit on the Cern Council were often physicists. And occasionally there would be also some non-scientists as well, but they were often physicists. And so Pestre notes here that physicists who participate in the council, physicists have interests which are not only those of their home countries. They're often convinced of the higher interests of their discipline, and they sometimes act, and very often did act, independently or even against their own domestic administrations. This historically has helped Cern immensely. And I'll get to it later, but there's this notion of a Cern Lobby, which is comprised of the Cern Council, which typically takes the message of Cern back home and lobbies for Cern as an institution back at with their home institutions, or with their home member states. Another very interesting thing is that the council has had remarkable stability over a very, very long period of time. And in particular, Denmark, Sweden, basically all of the founding member states, UK in particular, well, UK, France, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, the delegates to the council really did not change much over time. And this is despite the fact that their domestic administrations would change. And it's the stability which really helped foster Cern in the beginning and even later today. And in fact, if you go and look at the list of delegates sitting on the Cern Council today, most of them are physicists which have had a long history at Cern, and which also have some standing with their local domestic administrations. Now, of course, there were early challenges and even challenges which persist today, and those conflicts of interest in the early days were obviously strongest, it turns out, with the United Kingdom, and there are a variety of reasons for that. So in the mid-50s, the UK was developing its own nuclear program to become its own nuclear power, and so they had a very strong domestic effort. And they saw Cern, even though they were one of the strongest contributors to Cern, they also saw Cern as competing for their local domestic budget in terms of nuclear science. And so there were repeated complaints in the minutes and of the council about from Britain regarding the growing budget. And there were even efforts by Britain to change the voting procedures to allow Britain and other member states to have veto power and or require that the voting for the budget be unanimous. And those were all successfully avoided by the council, so that the voting for the budget and other matters is simple majority with an effort to have consensus first. So you first try to get a consensus, and if you really can't achieve that, then it's simple majority. And those have really benefited Cern as an institution in terms of its longevity. Now I want to move on to the impact that Cern has had on science diplomacy. So Cern has always been considered really a Western a Western laboratory or Western facility, but not a facility which was in the American camp or you know, for that matter. So it was considered to be international and somewhat neutral, but nevertheless Western. And it facilitated scientists from the USSR, from Dubna, for example, to come to Cern, infrequently, I might add, but nevertheless, they did come to Cern, and there Cern provided this ability to meet with Western scientists, particularly in the 1950s and the 1960s, where contact between the Western side of doing nuclear science and the Eastern side of doing nuclear science really was not strong at all. So this is a picture of Vladimir Nikitin on the left and Adolf Muchen on the far right, visiting with scientists at Cern in 1961. This is an interesting photograph. This is taken at a hotel in Geneva, Switzerland. This is the 1985 summit between the US and the USSR for arms control. And it was at this summit that really things were at an impasse. The US and the USSR, their negotiating teams were really not making much or any progress. There were statements which were, you know, quite recriminating against both sides. Now, Reagan and Gorbachev really made an effort together to try to forge you know, some friendly sort of a rapport between the two of them. And they wanted the two teams, the US negotiating team and the Soviet negotiating team, to also try to set aside some of the distrust that was taking place during the summit. And to facilitate that, sort of, I would not say secretly, but very unofficially, the Director General of Cern was asked to invite the two negotiating teams to a dinner at Cern one evening to try to break the impasse. And that was really remarkably successful. There was no particular thing of note which came out of the Geneva Summit in 1985, other than it was the fact that the two teams now began a course which involved some level of trust between the two negotiating teams. Of course, the follow-up summit in Reykjavik built upon that, and then that led to the arms treaties, which followed later. But Cern played an interesting role in the Geneva Summit of 1985. Since that time, Cern has tried to adopt its model of international collaboration and to promote international collaboration in regions which have difficulty in terms of you know, external strife between the different countries. So in the Middle East, for example, Cern has been a progenitor for developing the Sesame Lab, which is located in Jordan. It's a synchrotron light source, now a world-class facility for doing material science. And it involves member states from Turkey, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt, Palestine, Jordan, Iran, and Pakistan, all coming together to collaborate on science, which none of these individual countries could do individually, but together they can all collaborate. A similar model is now being developed for the Southeastern European International Institute for Sustainable Technologies, involving Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Albania, Serbia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Greece. And the idea here is to have centers where science and technology can be developed, where any one country wouldn't have the prowess to do it itself, but together they can pool their resources together. So such things as hadron and proton therapy treatment for cancer and things like this, where no country has the ability to really build such a facility on their own, but together they can try to pool their resources. And some of you, if you're from the physics department, some of you may recognize a few of the people. Here in the center is Herwig Schopper, former Director General of Cern. Off to the right over here is our good friend Kostas Fotis from Greece, interestingly enough. One of my favorites is, this is following some of the arms treaties negotiations coming between the US and USSR, that now Russia. So to decommission many of the artillery capabilities of the two countries. And so these are artillery shells from former Russian artillery shells, which have been decommissioned. And this is brass, sort of copper material, which was recycled and used to build, right here, you see it, particle physics detectors, which are in use at the Large Hadron Collider today. So this large brass particle physics detector was built from recycled Russian artillery shells. So some of the evaluation benefits from CERN are put into this document from the UK, which I find really remarkable. In this document from the UK, this is from August of last year, the UK really makes the case that CERN is now its national laboratory. UK no longer considers trying to build an effort which would rival CERN, but rather considers CERN its national laboratory, where it does all of the physics related to nuclear and particle physics. And in this document, they list many of the things which I personally find to be true at CERN. So CERN is open to all, regardless of nationality, sex, or religion. It really has this ability to expose young scientists to new skills and opportunities. It offers a collaborative environment which inspires and motivates creativity. It has a truly international center. It's not a national center with add-on international collaboration. It is a truly international center. And in, the participants at the center really feel that they take ownership of their contributions at this international center. It really fosters international collaboration, where the world itself comes together to overcome its challenges and to make progress towards common goals. And these common goals are so difficult to achieve, these scientific goals, so difficult to achieve, that when you come to CERN, everyone's focus is on trying to achieve those scientific goals, and nobody cares if you're an American or German or Iranian or Chinese or Russian. Everyone is working towards a common goal, common unifying goal. Indeed, no single country has the financial ability or the expertise, the multidisciplinary expertise to carry out this type of science. And so it's really by pooling the world's resources together where these advances in science and our understanding of the universe are able to take place. And CERN has this notion of fundamental research and this blue sky spirit, which I want to just to give you an example of. So here is a proposal from Tim Berners-Lee back in 1989, where he proposes something which is going to manage the ability of CERN to manage its information. So there are scientists collaborating on many different projects around the world, and a lot of the information could be lost, but also just simply not found. And so Tim Berners-Lee proposed something which he coined as the World Wide Web to deal with this information management across many different collaborators. And so this evolved into what is now we call the World Wide Web. We use it every single day. It has transformed, in many respects, the global economy. And on to the right here is a statement concerning basically putting the World Wide Web into the public domain. And of course, putting the World Wide Web into the public domain is part of the CERN mandate. when it was originally founded back with the Cern Convention in 1953. These are some hot headlines about in 2008 about Cern. So this is in Newsweek magazine, the biggest experiment ever. And then in parentheses, it says it's European, as if to say, wow, how could anything this big not come from the US? In 2008, it was one of the 50 best inventions from Time magazine, the Large Hadron Collider and Cern. In popular mechanics, it won the Grand Award design winner. And there was also some fear by some individuals about how safe the Large Hadron Collider was. So you see headlines, please, Large Hadron Collider, don't blow up the world, don't swallow us up into a black hole. But on other press releases, other press sources, you would see that the Large Hadron Collider is our friend. So really at that point, I would say Cern and the Large Hadron Collider really entered into the our home vocabulary around the world. In 2012, the Cern and the Large Hadron Collider discovered the Higgs boson, sometimes known colloquially here in the US as the God particle. Even many of us were able to grace the pages of the New York Times. So it really became widely known. Now, this is an aerial view of Cern today, looking from Switzerland into France towards the Jura mountain. You see the Cern complex. It's really a mishmash of buildings that have been constructed from 1955 today, and really sort of almost a random fashion, just to facilitate the scientific needs of the laboratory. If you view out, if you expand out, this is the aerial view of Cern. And in the circle here, this is the Large Hadron Collider. It is 27 kilometers in circumference. Over here to the left are the Jura Mountains. To the right, you see Lac Léman, or Lake Geneva, and the Cointrin International Airport over here to the right. The Cern facility or Cern headquarters, which we just looked at, is down here below. So to give you a sense of scale. Now, I enjoy cycling very much. I'm an avid cyclist, and so I have many times tried cycling around the LHC colliding ring, and those 27 kilometers circumference of the ring. You can't really, there are no roads which allow you to go directly around the ring. So that 27 kilometers becomes 41 kilometers of bicycling through beautiful French and Swiss towns, villages, and really just romantic roads filled with sunflowers and boulangerie, patisserie, and chateaus. So I'd like to take a few minutes now to just sort of describe my personal, what I call path integral. So what is a path integral? Well, an integral is something which in calculus is known as you take something and you sum it up, and so it's the sum of many different pieces. And a path, of course, is a trajectory through life. And so this is sort of my biased personal history through Cern and Europe, first as a student, then as a postdoctoral fellow, and then as a scientist collaborating from the US. So one of the interesting things that I certainly found as a student going to Europe for the very first time, where everyone in Europe typically drives a manual rather than an automatic. And so I had to learn how to drive a manual while I was at Cern. And I remember sitting in, this was before before Schengen, and there was a border between France and Switzerland, and it's sort of an uphill. It's not a strong uphill, but it was a bit of an uphill to pass from the border from Switzerland into France. And I was a bit nervous because I didn't really know how to shift correctly, how to stop, how to start again. And plus I'm going uphill a little bit as I'm coming to the border crossing. And I was noticing the cars ahead of me, people would just sort of briefly stop. They wouldn't even look at the guard, and then they would just go forward. And the guards were sort of, discussing amongst themselves, keeping an eye on the traffic, but not so much. And so I thought, okay, that's the strategy that I'm going to use. And so as I came up to the place where you're supposed to stop, I just sort of slowed down, and I nervously looked out of the side of my eye at the guard, and I tried to put the clutch of the car back into drive. And when I did that, I hit the gas too hard, and it caused the wheels to squeak and produce a little, leave some rubber on the road. And I just took off. And I looked into the rearview mirror, and I saw the French guards reach for their guns and come running down the road after me. My PhD advisor said, "Stop, stop, 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 stop," and began speaking to them in French, and explained that everything was fine, that I was an American who didn't know how to drive a manual, and they let us go, and everything was fine. Another pitfall that I think is sort of funny is that it's 12-hour versus 24-hour time. So when I was a student, of course, I did everything on 12-hour time, and I was supposed to give a talk at 14:40. Well, I didn't read carefully the email which scheduled my talk, and I only saw the 4, I didn't see the 1. And so I thought my talk was at 4:40 p.m. And of course, I arrived 2 hours late to my talk after everyone was coming back the other way from the meeting. And I asked, well, why is everyone coming back, going the opposite direction coming from the meeting? And they said, oh, well, you're an American. You obviously saw there was 4:40 p.m. and it was supposed to be at 14:40 p.m. So 2:40 p.m. So since that time, I do everything on 24-hour time. I do nothing on 12-hour time. Those are some sort of, some of the funny things that I had as a student going to Europe for the first time. There are some really interesting things which I find, which collaborating at CERN really accentuates. One might think that collaborating at CERN together with people from around the country, from around Europe, that the differences in culture between, say, Germans and Italians, French, or from Britain, that those differences would sort of, you have a melting pot, and that people would become less German or less Italian or less French or less British. And in fact, that doesn't happen. Really, the difference in cultures becomes sharpened. The stereotype Italian or the stereotype German or French, they are all there. And if anything, they don't become softer, they become sharpened. And that is, I think that is, I consider this to be the fact that the stereotypes of the different member states, people see this as, diversity is a strength of CERN, not a weakness. And that's very often seen in the way that the member states, for example, how you can take a career path. So in Italy, if you take your career path and you first go to work at CERN, and you take your career path at the laboratory without really coming up through the Italian system, which involves working for the Italian National Physics Institution, INFN. If you don't come up through the INFN system, it's very difficult for you to come back to Italy to find a career. Basically, you're no longer considered Italian. If you haven't stood your time working your way through the Italian system. And in Germany, it's the same way. If you're a German and you go perform your career at CERN, you come back to Germany to try to find a faculty position or something like that, it's very difficult to do. To find a career path in Germany, you really work through the German system. The French and the UK are very different. So France and the UK are much more closely integrated at Cern in terms of they send their students and their postdocs to really benefit from Cern as the laboratory, and then you come back to your home institutions, your home countries, and you can find a career there. What is interesting is that in France, in particular, the positions available in France are open to everyone, and in particular, those Italians which are unable to go back to Italy to find a position end up finding career paths all the time in France through the CNRS. Likewise, the Germans who aren't able to really go back to Germany because they've worked more at Cern, they end up finding a home in the UK. And I would say that the French and the UK systems are benefit tremendously by this influx of Italian scientists and German scientists. Some of the interesting things that I find really particularly dear to my heart is that when I fly into the Geneva airport and I pass through Swiss passport control, of course I have to display my passport. But when I do that, I take my passport, I put it into my bag, and I don't ever worry about that, because when I come to Cern, no one cares if I'm an American or if I am German or if I'm Russian or Chinese or what. They really only care about the science that I can contribute there. And they do care if I'm on a different experiment, if I'm on a competing experiment. So I participate on the compact muon solenoid experiment, and I have friends who I consider to be really competitors working on the Atlas experiment. And it's the difference in experiments which differentiates people at Cern, really not differences in countries. I find that is something which is very unique. Well, I find it very special at Cern. It really facilitates this international coming together of the world to tackle the most difficult scientific problems that we know about. I have many other stories, interesting things that I would like to, I could discuss from my time in Germany, learning to speak German, learning about how, the culture of Germany, learning about the culture of Europe. But I'm going to stop there, I think, and open this up for any questions which you might have, and which I'll be happy to receive.
Thank you very much, especially for me as a non-scientist for the history, which was extremely interesting. I think we have a couple of questions, but before we get to the couple of questions, I would like just very briefly, if you could discuss the extent to which your knowledge of foreign languages and your experience living abroad has or hasn't helped you in your collaborative work at Cern and elsewhere.
Yeah, so my knowledge of foreign language, so when I first started at Cern, I did not speak any language other than English. And it was not until later when I moved to Germany where I began to learn German. One, because as a postdoctoral fellow in Germany, it was expected that I would lecture at the university, and the lectures were expected to be conducted in German. So I was given roughly 12 months time to learn German to the level where I could lecture in German. And that was challenging, but it was fun. And I realized that I could do it. I was able to achieve a level of German which was sufficient for me to lecture and to receive questions in the subject, but it really wasn't sufficient for me to go and enjoy, the pub outing and speak with locals in German. nevertheless, the fact that I learned German, was able to lecture in German, allowed me to go to Cern and sit with my German colleagues and listen to speakers. Now, the language of science, I have to tell you, is English. Everyone that is the common denominator for everyone to conduct science. It doesn't matter if it's physics or chemistry or biology, it's all conducted in English. But I was able to sit with the Germans and listen to a speaker speak in English. And what I heard is, people laughing a little bit, commenting, and the German contingent would be doing the same thing as the Italian contingent or the French contingent. If the speaker was saying something which we felt was complete rubbish, we would speak in German and say that in German, yeah, this speaker has absolutely no clue what the speaker is talking about. Of course, the speaker can only speak English, or certainly can't speak German. And so the different countries are sitting together, sort of ragging on the speakers, laughing at them to some extent, and doing it within their own member state language. And so I realized that being able to speak a different language allowed me to really understand much more clearly about the social dynamics which take place in international collaborations. And it also gave me the credibility to continue working with my German colleagues, which I have done for the last 20 years on various projects. So I think being able to speak another language is absolutely, you can do the science without it, but to really collaborate on a really strong level and to maintain that collaboration over time, being able to speak the language and understand the culture is absolutely vital.
Okay, another question. I am aware that CERN sponsors a summer virtual internship program for undergraduates. What can you tell us about programs or other ways that UF students might get involved with or learn about international research through CERN? And secondly, based on your own experiences and career path, do you have advice for UF students who aspire to someday conduct research in Europe with CERN?
Yeah, so there are many opportunities for US undergraduates to get involved with research at CERN, both here in the US, but also the opportunity to travel to the laboratory in Geneva, Switzerland, and perform some summer research. This is often done in the context of summer REU programs, so research education for undergraduates. And there are many different universities which have summer REU programs. Sometimes this is offered even at the University of Florida. I do not know if that's being offered this time around at UF, but sometimes it is. And those there was sometimes funding for undergraduate students to be able to travel to CERN to conduct some of that research. Even if there isn't, then you can still conduct a lot of the research here in the US and collaborate with people at CERN, so that if you were to study, perform scientific research in graduate school, that would you would already have contacts in that sense. And I can't remember the other part of the question, but maybe that answered most of it.
Any advice, just based on your own experience, if you could give someone advice on sort of what to do next, what to do now, so that they could grow up and work in Europe and do that beautiful bicycle ride, what would it be?
So yeah, I think all of my experience has been in the research field and education field, and so there have been tremendous opportunities both in research and education to be involved with Europe. And so my advice would be to choose a graduate program or a program which has connections with Europe, and then take the opportunities which come along with that. And there are many opportunities. They will definitely come. I chose to, after graduate school, I chose to take a postdoctoral fellowship in Germany, not so much for the science, but because I wanted to live in Europe, and I wanted to learn about Europe, and I wanted to learn a new language. And so that was the reason why I went to Germany. And The science was super, interesting to me, but it was the opportunity to live and work in Europe for a couple of years, which I did. So that would be my advice. Just take the opportunities which come along, and there are many of them.
Okay, and then I think we have time for a couple more questions. How often at CERN did you have the opportunity to collaborate with other international labs?
Oh, okay, that's a great question, because there are other international labs, or I would say other national labs which have an international aspect. So one is the German synchrotron radiation, electron synchrotron facility, German electron synchrotron facility in Hamburg, Germany, which has had a large international component for a long time. And so I have, certainly when I was in Heidelberg in Germany, I collaborated with my colleagues there on many. And I would also have the ability to collaborate with them on occasion too. I had the ability to collaborate with colleagues at Fermi Lab here in Chicago, which also has a strong international component. And I've even had the ability to interact and collaborate with colleagues at the KEK facility in Japan, which is an accelerator facility, and also there's a facility in Beijing in China as well. And so CERN really is, brings all these different labs together for conferences and things like this, where we can all discuss and collaborate. So I have had quite a bit of opportunity to collaborate with colleagues from other international labs as well.
Okay, and then last question, just a very generic, do you have advice for an aspiring physicist?
Yeah, I do. Physics is like playing the piano. You don't learn the piano by watching somebody else play. You learn the piano by actually doing it. And so, my advice, if you want to become a physicist, is go get a physics degree and just do physics, solve problems. Physics is all about solving interesting problems. And so become a problem solver, learn how to solve problems, do the physics as an undergraduate, and then go to graduate school. And when you go to graduate school, the world will be opened to you. Physics is all about collaborating around the world on many different projects. And in fact, my career path in physics has really made the world seem much smaller. And I'm sure that as an aspirant, it will for you as well.
All right. Well, we are just about out of time. So I want to thank you, Dr. Kavanagh, for joining us. I want to thank all of the students and faculty members who have attended. Please keep a lookout for other European Studies Because talks. And certainly, if there's someone that you would like to have us host a talk for, just let us know. As long as there's a connection to Europe, we are happy to do that. So thanks to everyone. I hope you have a lovely day and a good start to the week. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.